does reading the book make you a better fan?
Let's unpack the magic.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
And welcome to another episode of the Teen Unicorn Podcast. I'm Sammy.
And I'm Tyler. And today we are going to be talking about a subject that I feel is pretty divisive, if you're talking to, like, true fans or whoever you're talking with.
Those comic book purists.
And we're going to be discussing whether or not reading the book or the graphic novel or, even to some extent playing, like, the video game, does that make you a better fan? So does being, like, I guess, like an OG reader of the source material,
yeah,
I guess to get, to cover it, as broad of a basis as we can, does that make you a better fan?
With air quotes.
With air quotes.
Better fan.
But we're going to start off today's episode like we typically do, just talking about what happened in the past week. And the day that we're recording this is actually after the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as much as we probably didn't like either team to be in this Super Bowl, we wish it would have been the Packers or it was a very competitive game last night. Yeah,
it was actually really good. It was really fun to watch just as like a football fan.
Yeah. It was nice that it wasn't like a complete blowout or you weren't watching Tom Brady win his like millionth Super Bowl. So no, it was really, really good, like a game standpoint wise. I mean, especially not having we were rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs, but right, I mean, it was more or less I just didn't want to root for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, more or less like their fan base, because their fan base is just kind of trash.
Yeah.
They are not very good fans, and I don't know.
We just lost any listeners that
I'm sorry.
That are Philly fans.
Because I remember there was I think it was in the Green Bay Press Gazette, there was like a letter from an Eagles fan. He had come up to Lambeau for his very first game up here, and he was just so like touched and amazed by how well received he was, going through like the tailgate process and like just how nice the Packers fans were. And he like straight up said like, you would not get treated like that if you were like...
Yeah, if you came to Philly, that's how...
you would not.
I don't know if you ever heard this, but like, God, this had to have been like back in like the 50s or 60s. Well, no. Had to been like the 60s or 70s. Where they had like, for one game in December, they had like Santa come out on the field in Philadelphia for a game. And like the fans in the stands were booing Santa and throwing snowballs at Santa. So yeah, Philly doesn't have like a really... They have a very passionate fan base, but a lot, especially from what you see, it doesn't seem like they are particularly a nice fan base.
Yeah. I would be very scared to go to a game there. Like, I wouldn't.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't go there either. But then, so, like, it was a good game. And then, like, on the other hand, I'm just kind of like, now comes, like, the yearly tradition of, like, thinking back on all the other Super Bowl halftime shows and realizing that none of them ever match up to, like, how good Lady Gaga was.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a conversation we have, like, every single year, just how good Lady Gaga's halftime performance was compared to whoever is performing. And this year it was Rihanna, and it was okay.
Yeah, like, it was fine. Like, I guess she didn't do anything, like, super weird. Which I guess was nice, because I really didn't know what to expect from her, because, like, she hasn't performed in, like, years. And I'm not, like, not that I don't like her, but her music is definitely not my go-to music at all. Right. But, I mean, I know quite a few of her songs, just by listening to the radio and stuff. So, yeah, it was fine. I think it was, like, in terms of a Super Bowl performance, it was very simple. But it was done well, and I really liked the floating stages. I thought those were really cool. But yeah, like, I just think it was just nice, clean, and simple, and so then I thought it was fine.
Mm-hmm. I really liked the floating stages. I immediately thought of Super Smash Brothers, and I feel like that's a big meme that's kind of going around right now, is kind of comparing it to that. I like Rihanna's music. Again, she's not one that I typically would go to, but I think in general, and I think because we were rating it last night, I'm like, I give it like a 6. I didn't hate it. I definitely did not hate it.
Yeah.
I was tuned in the entire time, but maybe it was just, I don't know, like, and I think that we're so accustomed to like having like a performer like with somebody, and like I think of like a lot of like the better halftime shows. Like I think of like Katy Perry's. She had like Lenny Kravitz and Missy Elliott, or like I really liked last year's with like Dr. Dre and Eminem and Snoop Dogg, and like which I know like a lot of people didn't, were kind of torn over, but like I kind of like having those big groups. But then when I think of like the ones that had like the best Super Bowl halftime shows, like it's always just been like a singular person.
Yeah, because Lady Gaga and I think Prince have had like some of the best.
I think those two like hands on are one. Oh, there goes our little Epcot ball here on this set. I think those two are like 1 and 2 for like my favorite halftime shows. Lady Gaga and Prince. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because like Prince, I don't think I watched it like live at the time. It's just like going back and like rewatching like, parts of his performance, and like it's still really good. Like,
and that's the hardest thing is that right now it's hard to find,
I think like
a full video of it. Because like in the NFL has done this a lot, at least for like last decade or so, has gone on like and put like the full show online so you can see it on YouTube. But like that one is like the elusive one that's hard to find.
Yeah.
And there's like an NFL films version of it, but it's kind of like a little documentary, like a 7-8 minute documentary of like how everything came about. But just because like it was like downpouring in Miami and like the stage was so slick, and you had like twin dancers with like 6-inch heels up there, and they're like full on dancing in the rain, and like Purple Rain comes on, and like it's literally downpouring, and like all the lights in the stadium are purple, and it's just like it was perfect. So like I just think that and like Lady Gaga are like 1 and 2 for me. I think Lady Gaga still maybe number 1.
Yeah.
But like I just how everything came together with Prince's. So then with Rihanna, like I think everyone was kind of expecting like, well, who's she gonna bring out? Like who's gonna be there with her? And it was just her.
Her and her baby bump, I guess.
Yeah, her and her baby. I guess
that was the special guest.
I guess that was the special guest.
So that's pretty awesome.
But yeah, all in all, it was okay. We'll see what happens next year. I really wish that they would like announce it like maybe the year before, so there's a lot of hype. Like right at the end of the halftime show, it'll be like, you liked this one, like here's next year's performer. But I don't know. I think the game was better, but
yeah.
I was very much looking forward to halftime regardless.
Yeah, I always like halftime. I guess if you could pick somebody for next year, like anybody.
Oh. I mean, I think like you and I would probably want Taylor Swift to do it. I don't foresee her ever doing it.
I don't foresee her ever doing it either, but she would just smash it like out of the park. And could you imagine if she did do it next year, like her coming back to tour, and like I don't know how long her tour goes for, but I'm pretty sure it ends before football season, because that's what she's doing is all stadiums.
Yeah, so it would have to.
Yeah, and like, could you imagine her like coming back and like doing like the halftime show for the Super Bowl? Like,
I just don't think she's going to do it. No. I'd really like to see Foo Fighters doing it. I think they would be really, really good. And I'm assuming like there's probably going to be like, oh, you need to get some country in there, because like the last couple years have not been. It's been more like, pop or hip hop kind or R&B kind of oriented. Yeah. I think like Eric Church would do. Oh, Eric Church would be really good.
I think it would be so cool, and it would be like just like a big like, I don't know, like, I'm not sure what the right phrase, but if you got the Chicks to come back and do a Super Bowl like halftime show and just be like F you or something, just to like.
What they really need, and I know that they can't do this just because they don't have the money or the star potential. They like, he's just too big of an act to do it. But I think Powerline.
Yeah. I was thinking this too. I'm like, just get like a bunch of like Broadway performers and just have them do like a show for halftime.
I mean, like first when like Super Bowl halftime first started, like it wasn't anywhere near like this. It was like like these charity events or like these big like nonprofit organizations, and it was like just a bunch of kids like out on the field, or like, you know, something more of like a theatrical act out there instead of like, you know, a main stage music act. And I think Michael Jackson was the first like star performer that came out, because it used to be like, you know, Children of the World presented by UNICEF or something like that. And then ever since then, like it's just been like, okay, we have to have like this big star. I think Elton John would be really good.
Oh yeah,
like
that would be a good show.
And something like, because he would kind of fall along the same lines of like when they had like Paul McCartney or U2 or something like that. Like, you know, a very big act that's, you know, maybe a little bit older, like, or Rolling Stones when they had that. But like, I think people got to the point where like they didn't want any of like the old fogies being on there anymore.
Yeah, it's so hard because you can't please everybody. Like, you're either gonna get like something like last year's performance, or even like Rihanna, like that's just not gonna vibe with the boomers and they're gonna be upset. And then you get somebody like a little bit older and you're gonna get Gen Z be like, well, I don't even know who this is, or I don't know. So
yeah.
But I think us like millennials, like we're pretty pleased with most people. Like, I think we just fall into like such a unique position because I feel like our music taste is so like
it's all over the place. It's so eclectic. But yeah, so we'll see what happens for next year's Super Bowl halftime show. But I guess, do you want to kind of maybe pivot into our main topic of the day?
The main topic. So does reading the book, novel, like comic book, graphic novel, whatever, like make you a better fan? And I guess maybe a good way to start is like, I guess, what's your relationship with like books, comic books? Like, do you read them a lot, or have you? Or,
I don't know how to read.
You don't know.
Me and Leah Michelle are just best friends. I shouldn't make fun of her. Like, that's not something to make fun of about anybody. If she legitimately cannot read, which I don't think is the case, like you shouldn't make fun of them. But no, I
Hooked on fun. That's working for me. Gosh,
you're so mean.
Sorry.
What was the question? what's my relationship?
Yeah, like.
So I more read like the graphic novels and comic books right now. I'm not big into reading books. I guess I never really have been.
Yeah.
Like growing up, like reading just was very difficult for me. And I think it was more or less because I had trouble like conceptualizing what was going on. So that's kind of where I would always make the joke like, well, why read the book when you can watch the movie? And I do think that there is, you know, a lot of truth to that, because like when I watched the movie, like obviously you're watching it, like you can see everything that's happening, like you understand what's going on, but you know, depending on a way that, you know, a writer or author is depicting something, or how it's, you know, written in a book, sometimes it's just hard for me to visualize that. So I guess like, and I remember like growing up and like, you know, obviously I had to read the books that came out in school, and then it was like 6th grade and Harry Potter came out.
Yeah.
And that just kind of like that started to pique my interest in it more. And like I read the first couple Harry Potter books, but then at that point they were starting to make the movies, and I'm just like, well, I might as well just watch the movies.
Just gonna watch the movies.
So I don't know, like reading is, I guess it was difficult for me as a kid growing up reading, because I didn't like it, and it was hard for me to understand. But and I think that's maybe kind of why I like comic books and the graphic novels, is because not only are you getting the dialogue, but you're getting like you get the visual cues that come with it too.
Yeah, and those are like concrete. Like, it's definitely something you can see, because like I think sometimes like when you're reading just like a book or a novel, like obviously there aren't pictures, so every person that's reading it has something different that they're picturing in their mind. Right.
So what is your like relationship with reading, or like how, like, you know, where do you kind of fall in the spectrum?
So I definitely gravitate more towards like books and novels. Like I definitely did not grow up reading really any sort of comic book. So, and I've always enjoyed reading. I didn't really like the like assigned reading in like, especially like high school. Like I feel like they always made you read like the worst books, except for To Kill a Mockingbird. I love that book, and like the only reason I read it was through school, and I really enjoyed that book.
I shouldn't say your only way of reading it, like your initial introduction.
Yeah, internet. Like otherwise, I'm sure I probably would have picked it up at some points, like in my 20s, but it's definitely a book that I've reread, and I've recently got on Audible, so I can just listen to it because it's just, I don't know, I really love that book. But yeah, I've always enjoyed reading. Like I remember going to the library quite a bit as a kid, and yeah, just getting all sorts of books and reading them and really enjoying them. And even now, like I'd say like the last couple years I haven't been so much on the reading train, but I've definitely been into like Audible. Like I have all the Harry Potter books on Audible. I've listened to those multiple times. So yeah, so I do really enjoy reading. I think I find it hard, like after I read a really good book, to pick up another book because, you know, I just don't know what I'm getting into, and, you know, is it going to be as good as the one I just read, kind of thing. So, but yeah, I do really, I like reading. I think it's a nice escape, especially when you're in like a really good book.
And you mentioned it like with Audible, and I think like listening to like an audiobook would be probably better for me than listen and then trying to reading like the actual book. Like if I had the option of listening to the audiobook for like the Harry Potter,
mm-hmm.
or reading the book, like I would choose the audiobook just because like there's someone else that like, and I shouldn't say maybe Harry Potter is a bad example because I know what happens in the first, but if it's like a brand new book, like I think I would be more inclined to want to listen to the audio version of it, because that person like knows what's going on. They could pick up, they can help me pick up on the clues in the way that they're speaking, or how their, you know, their voice or their dictation is. So I think that maybe that kind of falls more into like I need more than just words on a piece of paper
mm-hmm.
to help me, which is super weird because several years ago I started writing a book.
I was gonna say, you're an excellent writer. Like I told you the other day, like you just have a way with words. Like I really envy that. Like I am not a good writer. Like I feel like I have like thoughts in my head, and when I go to write them down, it does not sound very nice. So
yeah, so it's a very odd situation that like I don't like reading per se, but like I feel like I'm really good at writing, and I enjoy writing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually, and this is like another thing I want to get back into. It's just finding the time to do it between like all the other hobbies that we have, or all the other stuff that we like to do. Is that I really should finish writing my book, my novel.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, it's been shelved for a couple of years now, and like every once in a while I have like the urge to like, I'll be like, oh, like I have this idea, and it hasn't happened in a while. But
yeah.
I feel like I need to have like some sort of like creative spark to like make me go back into something like that. So like doing the podcast, like once we stopped it, like I think almost like a week or two after like we stopped it, I started having a creative, like I want to get back into this, I want to do it. Or like working on like the Disney photo books from our trips, like I'll get like really into like doing something because like I'll have an idea or like a spark of idea for a page, and then I'll want to do it because like I just want to get that like conceptualized out. So like I feel like my mind is good at like coming up with stuff, but then like processing someone other's words,
like
it can be difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Which then, you know, when it comes to like comics and graphic novels, like I don't have that problem because there's the author or the illustrator is conceptualizing it for me in the exact way that they want it to be.
Yep.
So like, because you had mentioned like when someone's reading something, like everyone kind of just thinks of something like in their own way.
Right. Like I've always like thought about it as like when you're reading a book, like there's a movie playing in everyone's head. Mm-hmm. Like and it's gonna look slightly different for everybody. You know, like even though like the author has written out like like describing something,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still going to look slightly different, I feel, for everybody.
And I feel like that, so like, one, I like the fact that there's like movies that go along with I guess popular books or popular ideas, because I remember watching the Divergent movies,
Mm-hmm.
which is based off a book, and God, this was like several years ago when I was still working at Prevea. During some downtime, I brought the Divergent books to work, and I hadn't read them, but I liked the movies, so I'm like, well, maybe I can get into reading the books. And reading the books after I had saw the movie helped me so much, because even though that there are, they kind of go off on tangents or kind of stray away, or sometimes in the case of like some of the Harry Potter books where it's like completely different in the movies than what it is in the book, at least I have an idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
So like in the Divergent books, because I read the first two after seeing the movie, like, yeah, they kind of were different, but like a lot of it was the same. So like when they're talking about Tris or Four,
yeah,
and kind of going through all like their scenes and everything, like I'm like, oh, like I know what this looks like, so I don't have to try so hard to like figure out where they are. Like I know where they are because I've saw it in the movie.
Yeah.
So like I think in that case, like that makes it easier for me if I am going to read something that I know, like, oh, yep, I already know what this looks like. I don't have to worry about figuring that out, because like I just feel like it's kind of like putting a puzzle together. Almost like I need to put like the whole background together before I can figure out like what's going on with the character. But then like it just takes me so long to put that puzzle together. But if I've already seen like the panels in a comic, or if I've seen the movie, like I already know that portion of it, which makes it easier. And I think that's just like me being like, I think that's a very left brain thing. I don't remember what's that, but like I need like more like.
Yeah, I think left is more like artsy and like visual and stuff. Yeah, I think so, because I'm very right brained, and I feel like it would be opposite.
We make one good brain.
We make one good brain.
So so does reading the book, I guess in general, or the original source material, does reading that make you like a better or a more loyal fan to that series, or can you still say that you're like a hardcore fan without having read that original material?
So I think I'm definitely on the team where you don't have to read like the original source material in order to consider yourself a fan or be just as good as a fan. Because I think sometimes like if you're like really hardcore into like any book and like you're just so you're just so into like perfecting like that onto like a screen, I think that almost becomes toxic.
And we have it actually mentioned in a later bullet here, like, and I think what you're kind of getting at, does it like set up an unreal expectation of that adaptation? Like, does like knowing what happened in the book and wanting it to be that exact way in like the movie, if that doesn't happen that way, does that then make you upset? Does that, and I think that does for some people, like, are you setting yourself up for disappointment because you've set your standards so high, be like, it needs to look exactly like this, and if something wavers off of it, like, then I'm going to be upset. So like you're kind of like, you're setting almost an unrealistic expectation for an adaptation. Yeah,
and I think I learned this like pretty young, like you don't, like, they're not gonna take a book and do it like page for page. Like it's not gonna, like, they're not gonna do everything exactly the same, and that's okay, because the director and like producers and stuff, like, they're taking their own like creative spin on it and making it better for film, because they're two different mediums, like writing and and putting something like to visualize. So not everything that is like written can come across as well, like when you try to put it in like a visual form.
Right.
So I think they try to make the best judgment calls when they're making these movies or shows to come across like the best way it can in that visual form. And sometimes that means like changing things. Now, sometimes I think they change certain things just because they think it's going to
enhance the story?
Not really enhance, but maybe like make more money off of it. Like,
okay.
You know, like it's not really necessarily better for storytelling, but I think sometimes they just want to make things like, you know, better because it's gonna like, oh, like did you see this scene, like it just, you know, they had like this character in it, or I don't know, like, and make it more so like for the money, I guess.
So almost commercializing
yeah.
It just capitalize on like a certain scene or a certain character.
Yeah.
So then on the other hand, does not reading the book or the source material, does that make you less of a fan?
I don't think so. I think you do have to keep in mind there's probably going to be things that you might miss out, but you're really not going to know that you're missing out on them unless somebody tells you. Like with the Harry Potter books, like there's a lot of stuff that they left out of the books, but they still, like, I don't know, you got to keep them separate. Like the books are just the books, and like the movies are the movies. Like they're just, you know, like they're the same but they're different. And the movies do tell a complete story. So I don't feel like if you've just watched the movies, like you're missing out on like Harry's story. There are, I feel like, some extra things that happen in the book that are fun, or, you know, sometimes like they changed out like some characters that maybe helped out Harry. So, you know, so that's different. And I think that's just something that, like, if you take the time to read them, then you get to find out those little like magical tidbits of like the source material. So no, I don't think that makes you a bad fan or like less of a fan if you don't read it, but I think you're rewarded if you do go and read the source material.
So are there, I guess, because sticking on the Harry Potter subject, are there any like plots or, you know, key moments in the stories or in the books that didn't make it to the film that you're kind of like upset that you didn't get to see in like the film version?
Well, there's a few things that come to mind. Peeves, the poltergeist, like, do you know who Peeves is? Yeah, like, no. You've never, yeah. So Peeves was completely left out of the movie. He's like a little troublemaker ghost that roams Hogwarts and makes a lot of like trouble for the students, especially like when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are wandering about the castle at night. Like, he's usually out and about, like causing some ruckus and trying to get them into trouble and stuff. There's SPEW that Hermione creates for the improvement of elves and like trying to get them like paid wages and make sure that they're in good living conditions and not being like abused, essentially. Like, it's just like this whole like organization for house elves that's completely left out of the movies. Is it like super essential to like the overall storyline? No, but it's like it was just like a nice like aspect in the book, and like I think it just has more character development for Hermione, and it just kind of like speaks to her, I don't know, like kindness and like in that. So yeah, so like that was left out, and I don't know, there's probably like a couple of the bigger ones that I can think of, but
okay, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I guess, and we've kind of been focusing a lot on Harry Potter, and it's because like that was probably the biggest thing in our early childhood that started off as a book.
Yeah.
And then
they
capitalized on the success of that book to make the movie. And I think right now what we are kind of enjoying now is we're seeing a lot more of the comic book adaptations. Yeah. Which is where, you know, I guess I come in into this situation or into this conversation from reading the comics and seeing how they're portrayed on the movies. And I guess, like, growing up, like, reading comics wasn't anything that was on my radar. I didn't read comics growing up. That was definitely more of, like, an adult thing that I got into. And I think it was more of the movies got me into reading the comic books. Like, it was after, like right around phase 1.
Yeah.
And you're right around the Avengers when that came out. Then I was like, oh, like, these are stories that, like, these are characters in stories that have, like, more adventures, or they have more, missions that I can read in these comic books. And I guess for me, seeing how similar but, like, completely different these characters and these stories are from the comics to the movies, I think that's where, at least, like, on a comic book standpoint, that I feel there is, like, a lot of tension, because there are people, you mentioned before, like, comic book purists.
Yeah, which I don't know if it's okay. Like, that's just the term I like to use, just because I feel like...
I think it's fine. I mean,
okay. Like, I don't want anyone to be, like, super offended if I use that.
You just pissed off, like, Philadelphia Eagles fans earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, because I called them trash, but it's true, so...
So... I think it's more of something where, like, I get to see it from, like, a comic book standpoint, where there's people that see, like, these characters in the comic books, and even in the comic books, like, there are people they're like, well, this is so out of character. This is, like, I can't believe that you would change this, or you would have, like, these two characters, like, kiss or something. And I'm just,
like, I remember, sorry, like when Cap was, like, Hydra or whatever, like, I remember that being, like, a big thing.
And I liked that series. I really do enjoy that arc, because it was such a different, like, just dramatic role change. So, like, I guess to explain what you're kind of talking about is that, Cap, the Sentinel of Liberty, like, he is America personified. He is, like, the goody two-shoe, like, number one soldier. That's
America's ass.
That's America's ass. And he fights. He fights the Nazis and punches Red Skull, and, like, he's everything. He's the symbol of freedom and everything that is the American way. And then, God, that was probably, like, almost 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
They changed his story, that he actually was a undercover Hydra agent.
He was Hydra all along.
So he definitely, like, and the panel was, like, he even said, like, Hail Hydra, and, like, I remember, like, that was huge. Like, it wasn't just, like, huge for, like, the comic book community. It was huge for, like, just pop culture in general.
I was gonna say, like, I heard about, well, because, like, you were telling me about it. Like, yeah, I remember that being, like, a big thing, like, within like, Marvel itself. Like,
and, like, it was on, like, it was on the news. It was in the newspaper. Like, the New York Times was covering it. Like, and this was huge. Like, people are like, oh my God, you're changing, like, this core feature of this character. And I wasn't upset about it. I was interested in it. Like, I wanted to see what they were doing with this character, because, I mean, I obviously, like, I really enjoy Cap's character, but I'm like, I want to see where this goes. I want to see why they're doing this. What is the reasoning behind it? And then all kind of accumulated into the Secret Empire storyline, which I do really much enjoy. I think that that's probably another pretty divisive storyline in Marvel continuity. But, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think it was good. It was a good reimagining of the character, but for every single time Marvel changes something about a character, a couple years later there's a huge universe-shattering event that wipes out pretty much everything and gets them all back to square one, and kind of like, or like, oh, it's in a different universe, or like, like this didn't really happen. This is what was going on behind the scenes. And so, like, there's always something that's not necessarily going to, like, retcon what happened, but is basically going to, like, start the slate fresh.
Right. I was just going to ask. So I think that's one of the big differences is between books and novels and comic books, because there are different like story arcs and universes in comic books. Whereas usually in like books and novels, like you just have this one linear story and that's it. Like you don't have like these characters going off into like a different universe, or you don't have them like starting over with a different arc, right? Like when they say arc, like that's just a completely different story, right?
It's not like you're going to have like divergent of like 3 Harry Potters in like one castle at one point.
Right.
Yeah, and I for what it's worth, I mean, that's what comic books are. Like, they're always going to change. They're always going to... There's always going to be a new issue number 1. They're always going to, like, reprint, you know, or they're going to start fresh with something new. And, like, you kind of have to do that because there's no way that... There's not really a way that you can keep, you know, 70, 80 years worth of character development and, like, maintain everything that's ever happened in that one character between different writers and different illustrators and different, you know, like chief editors. It's always going to change. Like Cap has always changed, but he's always kind of been that same character about like what he does or what he goes through, you know, getting old and like getting the super soldier serum taken and him dying, like Sam Wilson taking over. Like that's all stuff that like eventually does get kind of wiped clean at the end because then, Cap does get the super soldier serum back in there. Tony Stark never actually died, or he was able to implant his, you know, his AI into, you know, a body that he had been kind of holding on to, you know, in case that he did die, you know, or Sam Wilson, like, yeah, he's Cap, but now he's kind of like brand new Cap all over again. So it's always something that's going to change and evolve. And I think that's just how comic books are in general. So like when someone's like super like a purist about it, like, this character would never do that, and I'm like, you don't know that because they can.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. Is like, so then on what grounds do these comic book purists have like the right to be so upset at these changes that the MCU is making if like these characters and stories like aren't like, it's not like one linear story, like they go off on all these different arcs and stuff. So like why do they get so upset?
I don't know. It's something that I don't get upset about, you know, honestly. Like, and we've seen so many different changes, and I guess that's kind of like why I really wanted to talk about this, is because there are so many different changes at what you see in the comic books as to how it relates into like especially like the MCU. That's kind of like our bread and butter when it comes to this. Like, we are huge fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You are a fan of it because I feel like I made you a fan of it, and then you just
you got me hooked.
I got you hooked, and you are genuinely a fan of it now. I'm a fan of it, and I have a deeper appreciation. I am not saying a deeper appreciation than you, but just a deeper appreciation for the movies because I know these characters more on like a more specific level because of the stories that I've read in their books. Like Miss Marvel comes to mind as like one of those characters, like even more than Cap. Like Miss Marvel like is my favorite comic book character. Like you know, she's a teenage Muslim girl from Jersey, but like I can relate to her because of the way that the writing is and the way that she's portrayed in there, and like she's just a good person. But when she gets to the MCU, they made some changes, they made some tweaks, but the same character, the same premise is she's a good person. She's a good, quirky, weird teenager that loves her superheroes, that geeks out when she sees those superheroes or gets to interact with those superheroes. And that's not any different than how she's portrayed in the MCU as she is in the comics.
But I feel like those are like the two things that like I hear the most complaints about with Miss Marvel, like the show, is like, one, I can't relate to her, and two, like they changed how she got her powers, and like I'm so upset about that. Like,
you know, so like the whole powers thing, like that's something that I feel like we were gonna have to get to eventually in the MCU. So how she gets her powers in the comics, it's basically from a Terrigen bomb mist that was set off due to the Inhumans. And it turns out in the comic books like she is an Inhuman. Well, the Inhumans were only created in the comics because Fox had the rights to the X-Men, and they wanted to keep using X-Men characters. Marvel's like, well, we have our own stuff going on here, and
because they had used the term mutants, which Marvel couldn't use,
and Marvel couldn't use that. So then Marvel's like, well, if you guys want to be, kind of persistent on this, like, we'll just create a whole different line of mutant-like characters, not call them mutants. They're Inhumans that have, and these Inhumans kind of have the same role, or they have the same attributes of the X-Men, but then Marvel can use that however they want instead of having to kind of be, strongholded in by what they can and cannot do with X-Men. So that's why for like a while there, like, you weren't seeing new X-Men comics. You were only seeing new Inhuman comics, or like why the Inhumans were always beating up on the X-Men, because Marvel was pushing this Inhuman line. Well, now that everything's back underneath one kind of umbrella right now, Marvel's kind of like, well, yeah, we can talk about mutants now. Like, we don't have to, like, we're not going to consider, especially in the MCU, like, we're not going to be considering any Inhumans. Like, they obviously flirted with it when they had the Inhuman show, which did not go well. That does not tie into the greater MCU in general, but, like, we've seen Inhumans in the MCU. We've seen Black Bolt, who's probably he is an Inhuman. And Miss Marvel is the other one that we've seen pretty recently here. She's an Inhuman, but in the MCU, she's going to be seemingly an X-Men. Or, she's going to be a mutant, which would lend to her being...
Because that was the first time that they had used the word...
mutant.
Yeah, because Bruno says, like, a mutation in your gene, or, like, DNA or whatever.
And then you heard, like, the old, like, X-Men 98 theme, or X-Men 97 theme song, or whatever it is. And then her powers in general are different. Like, in the comics, like, she, like, literally, like, embiggens, and she grows, like, her limbs out, and it's just, like, she's got, like, a 10-foot wide fist, but it's like, it's literally her skin, and it looks like her fist. It's just big, as opposed to in the MCU, it's now like this kind of like crystallized force.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it almost looks like she's kind of glowy. But I mean, she's still like embiggens. Like, she's still like,
she says it.
Yeah, she says it. I think maybe for like the show they maybe wanted to embellish it a little bit and add in like the color and stuff.
But I mean, but regardless of how they portrayed it, it's still the same power,
right? Yeah,
and it's still the same character with her heart and with her story and like how who she is on a molecular level, portraying that and using those powers. Like, that's all the same. So like when they change like a little bit here or there, or they change Jane Foster's background just a little bit to like how she became Jane Foster, like, or how Jane Foster became Lady Thor. Like, she still had cancer. She still went through a process of becoming Mighty Thor, and how Mew Mew got to her. Like, that's all the same. It's just, if it's not the exact way that it was put on the panels in the books, like, I feel like people are just going to be, there are going to be people that are going to be mad about that, because like, well, that's not the way they did it in the comics, and that's not how it's supposed to be.
Well,
They're not aiming for that specifically.
Yeah, and I think I've said that before, because like, obviously with a comic book, you're getting like the pictures and the visualization along with the words of the story, so you're getting like a pretty full picture. And if you already know all of that, that's happening, and they just put the exact same thing on a screen, like, is that still going to be like super exciting to like watch? Like, I feel like with a book it's a little bit different, because like you don't get the pictures, so right. Like, when you get like characters that are cast for these books and stuff, like, you're like, oh, like, well, I didn't really picture them that way, but I or it's just, it's different, or like certain scenes and stuff like that, like you don't have all of that with a book. So I feel like it's a little bit different like with a book, but at the same time, like, I don't think you want like every little detail to be depicted. Like, I think you kind of want something maybe a little bit different. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Like, does reading or holding on to that source material, does that set an unrealistic expectation for when the book, or when the TV or the movie adaptation comes out. And I think it does. Like, I think if you're so beholden to, you know, kind of thinking as the original source material, so thinking of like the Harry Potter books as that is the Bible, that is the road on which everything is paved on. If you can't variate off that a little bit, then, or if you start to variate off that even the slightest, well, then you failed.
Yeah. And
I don't think that that's right. And I think that you're just setting yourself up for disappointment if you're so like, everything in this comic book, it needs to be portrayed on the screen in the same exact way. Like look at like Falcon, like in the comic books, like he has a sidekick, and like they're legit like a kind of like a mutant bird person. Like if you really want to see that in the movies, or you know, that like that's gonna be gross, that's gonna be weird. Like not everything can be like transcribed well from like the comic books over, or even like the books into the movies.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, especially like with the comic books, like some of those costume choices, could you imagine those like in the MCU right now? Like, I think they would look weird and out of place. And I just don't know if that would be like the best like call to go with like such like a pure like comic book like costume. But I know some people get really bent out of shape, like, oh well, the costume doesn't look like that in the comic books, and I'm like, I think they're doing their best to like try to make it work.
Well, not only that, not just try to make it work, but like make it look like it's a like legitimately something that could happen. Like, it's realistic. Like, like you can see like, oh yeah, like Captain Marvel doesn't look the same way as she does in the comic books as she does in the movies, but like the way she looks in the movies really plays to her character. Like she is ex-military, so like she should have some sort of like suit that looks more a little militaristic, if that's a word. Yeah. Like it should look like more like combat ready. It should look something more along the lines of like something more like Cap's. Like Cap's a good example too. So like look at how like sleek and thin and almost like shiny soft his Avengers 1 outfit looked. Like that really like, not like it wasn't powder blue, but it was like a lighter blue. Yeah. And then look as he goes on, like as he goes into like, especially like Age of Ultron, where it's more like it looks more like a military suit. It looks like he is trying to, you know, go off to battle, right? Or like going into Avengers Infinity War, where it's like it's ragged, it's beat up, like it's real world tested. Like if you had like that really slick shiny suit with like the metal scaling of like his chest piece, it would just look super weird in the MCU, and I wouldn't like that.
Yeah. Well, and even like in WandaVision, like for the Halloween episode.
Oh,
like, yeah. Those outfits were the comic book outfits, correct?
They were based off the comic book outfits.
Right.
Especially Wanda's looked like hers.
But could you imagine if she was going around the MCU looking like that all the time? Like it would be weird. It would be out of place. So I feel like you have to make those changes. Like it's needed, it's necessary to make it look good for the MCU.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you mentioned like WandaVision specifically, because I remember like when reading or listening to an interview with Elizabeth Olsen, and she was talking about taking on the character arc. Taking on this character, and Kevin Feige and at the time Joss Whedon said like, you will never have to wear like the original, like how Wanda looks like, how Scarlet Witch looks like in the comics, where it's that really tight like red leotard with like the pink leggings and like the very deep low cut V-neck, you know, kind of suit where, you know, it's a lot of cleavage, and you know you won't have to worry about wearing that. And then WandaVision, she's like, I'm gonna wear it, but it was very it was very much in line for what they were trying to.
It worked so well for that episode, and I think that's one of those fun things. Like, if you've read the source material, you knew right away what that was.
Yep.
And I think that's that's what you get for reading. And for like me, who like didn't really realize that right away. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Like, I like that. But, yeah, like you just, as, if you're reading the comic books, then you get to pick up on all that fun stuff. And I think that's, like I said, like, I think that's like your reward for reading the source material. But I don't think you have to like go like scene for scene, like depicting everything that happens in those comic books, like to put them on screen. And like, I just don't think that's going to work well all the time.
But that's not to say that there aren't scenes from like the MCU specifically that I watch and I'm just like, oh my god, that is the panel. And I love that.
I know. You get so excited and I love it because then you tell me about it and I get excited with you and like.
Yeah. So the first time like that really happened for me, like I straight up like realized like this is like literally ripped right out of the panel. We saw it here and there a little bit in the Captain America series, but especially in Civil War.
Yeah.
And kind of it was I like the idea of the splash panel. So basically the splash page or the splash panel is one big page, left and right side. All it is just one big panel with so much going on. And you definitely get that a lot with like the Avengers type of movies. So like the scene where they're kind of like the camera's kind of swirling around and like the Jatari are kind of like all falling around, like everything, like that's like one of those scenes. But the scene at the end of Civil War where Tony and Steve are fighting one another in kind of like the bottom of that ballistic bunker.
Yeah.
And Tony just puts everything into his hand repulsors and shoots out, and Cap takes his shield and puts it down, and it's just shield on repulsors, and you get that like huge like just impact and that big glow. Like that is literally taken right out of the comic book. I have the comic book right over there in the other room. Like it's and I as soon as I saw it, I'm just like, this is beautiful. Like, this is how you do a good adaptation, because you're taking the characters that have, their certain sets or their certain abilities or their characteristics, and you're upping them into a real world situation, giving them depth, giving them emotion. And then when you have like the epitome, like you're like this just really top hectic moment, it's so hard for me to explain it. Like you get in and then you all of a sudden like you realize like that is from the book. That is just, they rip that right out of the page. Or like a lot of that in like the airport scene, like a lot of that type of fighting, like that type of scene is a splash page. And I'm just kind of like, that is what I want to see.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to recreate something, like recreate those type of moments, because the comic book fans that have read that, they know it.
Oh yeah.
They get it right away. They understand what you're doing.
Right.
And they will geek out. They will be like me. Like they're just giddy
yes,
watching
they're so excited. And me as like a person that like, doesn't read it, I'm just like, wow, that was such a good scene. Like that just blew me away. So I think it's a win-win for everybody. Like,
so I do think that there are times where that definitely does work, where it's something like there are moments that you have to pull directly from the page. And that one definitely did it for me.
Yeah, but they do it in a way that it works. Like, that's not like not every scene or every character costume or it's just not always gonna work if you're gonna pull directly from the source material.
So, so I guess something on that same end. Do you think so? Like for me, explaining that scene where like I knew it was I didn't know it was coming, but like I knew once it was here, I'm like, oh, that's from the comic book. Like, do you think like reading the comic book or reading the book before the movie comes out, or like knowing what it is, does that spoil it for you at all? Like, do you like let's say like for reading the Harry Potter books, like watching the movie, like knowing what they're doing in the movie to realizing like, oh, Cedric's gonna die here. Like, does that ruin it for you, knowing that that's coming up, as opposed to someone like me where it's just like, oh, I just met this Cedric guy. Like, I didn't know anything about him.
I'm just thinking of all the people that that read the Game of Thrones book, and they knew that the Red Wedding was coming up, and they were watching, like, filming their friends that hadn't read the book, and they didn't know it was coming. That's what I was picturing in my mind. Yeah, I think that's...
Speak about fans that are really pissed about what happened in the book or didn't happen in the book and how it was adapted to the TV show.
Yeah, I tried reading Game of Thrones, and it was one of those things where, like, I had already watched, I think, the first season, and then I was reading the first book, and I'm like, I've seen all this. I want to get to stuff that I haven't seen yet, like, when I'm reading. So I don't know, it could have been, like, George R. R. Martin's, like, writing style, too. Like, it's not really a type of book that I would tend to gravitate towards.
Plop down and read it.
Yeah, like, I couldn't finish it, so I didn't finish it. But no, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, I think on the one hand, obviously it is spoiled because you know what's going to happen. But at the same time, you don't know exactly how it's going to happen. Or, you know, are they going to change it up a little bit? Or
are they going to be, like, super, you know, reflective, you know, stay really true to that source material? Like, you don't know that.
You don't know. So I think on one hand, you kind of know, or you kind of expect it to happen. And then, you know, and so then I guess if it does, like, I mean, I guess maybe it's spoiled, but it's different. Like, you know, it's probably not going to be exactly the same, you know, or at least not exactly the same as maybe how you pictured it when you were reading it. You know, but I guess, like, you had the wow moment, or, like, the oh my gosh moment when you were reading it. So, like, yeah,
and I think, like, on my end, like, when it comes to, like, comic books, is that how Marvel has done things in the MCU is very much not the way it's done in the comics.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, how do they, like, pick, like, which, like, storylines or arcs, or, like, how do you think they, like, pick which ones to choose, like, to...
Well, I would ask Kevin Feige that question, not me.
I know.
I do honestly think it just depends on how well a series does, or how beloved a certain line, you know, storyline is. Because especially, like, so let's say, like, go back to Civil War, like, that's not something that was, like, in Marvel's canon for, like, 30, 40, 50 years, and, like, was a beloved storyline for so long. Like, that came out, like, in the 2000s. So, like, that was something relatively new. I think it was, like, mid-2000s when it came, or recent. So, you know, when they were kind of planning all this, you know, and they got to, like, Civil War, which that happened within 10 years of the original storybook, or storyline coming out. So I think it just depends on how well something does. Like, Miss Marvel, like, she is a very new character, or relatively new. Like, she has only been in Marvel canon for less than 10 years, and she's already had, you know, multiple different, you know, number one issues, so kind of like rebooting the story issues. But, like, she has a role in this new MCU. She has a whole series now. She's going to be in a movie where she's teaming up with established characters, which you are very excited, which you're both very excited for.
I'm so excited for that.
So, like, it just really depends on how well, I guess, certain stories do, and then whether or not, like, that line, I guess, would be good enough to kind of, you know, tap into future. I mean, there are a couple different lines that we've seen, like Age of Ultron. Again, which is, I mean, right now, it's not something new, but when Age of Ultron came out, that was another thing that had only been out for, like, less than 10 years. So, like, they're not really pulling back from, like, the archives on a lot of these things.
Like,
a lot
they're
of
not going back to, like, the 60s or something.
Right. But, like, some of the character development and some of the stories do kind of get pulled, like, so, like, Cap's original, the first Avenger movie, like, that was all, like, it was a timepiece. It was very much like, this is what happened with him and the Red Skulls and with the Nazis. Like, that definitely makes sense. Like, that is something that was very much, like, pulled from the old source material and just created for the movies. But, like, when you get into something like the Infinity War, like even something like that was only created. I think that was created around like the early '90s, so it had only been out for like 20 years. So I mean, it's an older story, but like it's not like you're pulling from like the original days of Marvel Comics and Timely Comics. So I guess it just to me, I would think it just depends on what comic series really do well. Like the Guardians had been around for a little while, but like the iteration that we see in the MCU, like that iteration in the comics, had only been around for a few years before they decided to greenlight like, oh, we should make a movie about this. So like having like Drax, who is a character who has been around for like a while, but like not with the Guardians.
Mm-hmm.
So then like, oh well, now that this line or this comic storyline, people are really digging it. Like, yeah, let's make this into a movie. And I think it just kind of depends on how well something does. And I think that in general, that's how well something does. Like, look at Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Like the first book came out, and it was almost like, oh well, we've got like a worldwide hit on our hands. Like, we need to like.
Yeah.
You got 7 of these?
All right.
Like, yeah, we can make 7 movies. Hell, let's make it 8 movies.
Right. We'll split the last one in 2.
And I think a lot of it just kind of comes into how well something does. Like Twilight or the Divergent series, like those were all, set novels or, groups, series of novels that they knew like, oh, once it does well as a book, like let's get a film adaptation of it right away. And it's I think it's not even like like a series. Like look at like Nicholas Sparks. Like he's a very good author. Like he is a very he's a best-selling author.
Right. Yeah.
So every time a book comes out, they're like, well, we need to make this into a movie.
Into a movie.
Put Miley Cyrus into this movie. We're gonna make millions. So it just, I'm assuming it just depends on how well something does. But do you think that like everything that does well, like do you think it deserves to have a movie or a TV show, or do you think like is there a line where like you draw in the sand where like no, like this, even though this did super well, like we don't need a story, we don't need like a film of this.
I don't know. I feel like like it's nice to see, especially like with books, like it's nice to have a visual to go with it, if it does well. But that doesn't mean like, I mean, I don't think like everything has to have it. And sometimes I think, I think sometimes like they just want to do it just because they know that they can make some money off of it. And
which I think is maybe the case with like something like Nicholas Sparks.
Yeah.
Like,
so like I think if you can get somebody like really passionate and make it so good, like I think like what James Gunn did with like the Guardians, like I remember when you were telling me about like
the talking raccoon and a sentient tree.
I'm just like, what the heck is that? Like that just sounds so weird. Like I'm not gonna like this. I mean, I will watch it, but I'm like, I'm not gonna like it. But I think had you had anybody else but James Gunn doing it, I don't know if it would have turned out as well. Like, so I feel like if you have like the right story and the right people behind it that want to make this come to life, it's probably going to work really well. Like if you already have a good story. But I don't know. But yeah, that doesn't mean like everything needs to be made into a movie. Like I think like the Divergent series, like I didn't really care for the movies. Like I thought like they were all right, but
I liked the movies, and then they did that stupid thing where they're like, well, we're gonna take the last book and make it into a 2-part movie, and they're like, no, we're actually gonna make it into a TV series. Yeah. But then Shailene Woodley's not gonna appear in it or not gonna star in it. So I think like that was probably one of those like, oh, we've got a successful young adult series that's in books and novels, and there's gonna be multiple of them. Let's cash in on that. Like that I think that was more of like something where they commercialized
like,
it.
I think I watched the first 2 movies and that was it. So anything after that I haven't seen because it was just not good. So yeah, not everything does.
What
like,
do you think about the Hunger Games?
Hunger Games, those I think were better, and I think those were better. But I mean, when it comes down to it, like, I'm probably almost always going to pick, like, the book for the most part. But that's not to say, like, I don't. Like, I have to look at them pretty, like, separate. Like,
yeah.
The books are the books, the movies are the movies. And, you know, there's just going to be some things that just aren't the same. But I do like the Hunger Games movies. Like, I like those, like...
I enjoy those.
Yeah, like, I thought those were good.
And I think, like, especially, like, when I was writing my book, like, I was thinking about, like, what I would see in, like, the Divergent book, or the Divergent movies, or the Hunger Games movies, or, like, even, like, the Harry Potter movies, where I'm just kind of like, oh, I can kind of pick pieces of that to, like, build a world, because it's already been conceptualized for me.
Yeah.
And then, like, I can take that to help conceptualize, like, my world. And, you know, I can kind of use that as a tool to help build what I want to achieve in something. But then on the other hand, like, there are some things where it's very much like, I like, no, do not make this into a movie or a TV film. And there are authors out there that are very much just like, no, you can't touch this.
Yeah.
The one that comes to mind to me right now is Brian K. Vaughan with Saga.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned it on the show before. Like, I love Saga. It's one of my favorite series. It's a very long series. So, like, I collect the issues. Well, now I've been collecting the issues now that, like, I'm kind of caught up on it.
Yeah, the new stuff that's been coming out.
But before, like, I was getting, like, just, like, the paperback collections of them. So, like, there'd be, like, 5 or 6 issues in a collection, and there's, like, 10 of them.
Yeah.
Already. So, like, you're up, like, I think right now, we just went to the comic book store the other day, and I picked up, I think it was 61.
Yeah, 61.
Issue 61. And they just started this series back up again after a pretty long hiatus, and they're only halfway done.
Yeah.
So, like, by the end of it, there'll be, like, 20 of these paperback books for one huge series. And Brian K. Vaughan's like, no, this will never be a movie. I will never allow this to be a movie or a TV series. I will never allow this.
Yeah.
And I think that's really awesome of him to have drawn that line in the sand, because I enjoy Saga. One, it is hella weird sometimes, and it is grotesque, and it is just, sometimes it could be offensive. There is a lot of, like, sex and nudity and bloodshed in it, and it's just like that's something that's not going to, like, go
right.
well
You're not going to be able to depict it as well, or, you know, as it should be, like, you know, in the comics. Like, that's not going to come off as well on screen. And yeah, I think for writers, like, if you can't do that, then you can't visualize my material, and that's A-okay.
And, like, and I know, like, even, like, kind of, I think of, like, I don't want to say her name because I know, like, we don't like her, but J.K. Rowling. Like, when they were trying to build the theme parks.
Yeah, I know there was.
I think this is kind of along the same lines. Like, you're, instead of, like, you know, visualizing it and making it into, like, a TV show, or like like, this is a theme park. And Disney was actually had their hat in the ring on this for a while. Mm-hmm. But then she was like, no, it has to be this. Like, you're not thinking about it the way that I'm conceptualizing it. That is not what I want. That's not what I created. So she very much did draw that line in the sand and be like, no, like, you don't get to do this unless everything is 100% the way that I want it to be. And I think for, you know, a creator or an author or an illustrator to say that, I think that does take a lot of courage, because there are other people in the room be like, bro, like, this thing is like $1 billion, like, franchise. Like, it doesn't matter what you want. Like, we can make money off of this. We can commercialize off of this.
Right.
But then for, like, someone like, you know, when J.K. Rowling was doing that, or like when Brian K. Vaughan is like, you know what, I've got other stuff that I have, like Paper Girls, you can have that. Like, we can make a series out of that.
Loved Paper Girls.
Paper Girls is
I haven't
awesome.
read it. I do need to read those. I think I would really enjoy them, but I like the series.
Really so good. Like something like that, where I'm just kind of like, okay, well, and even like Paper Girls, like, a lot of that changed. Because you were asking me quite a bit when we were watching Paper Girls.
I was curious what was like different.
Which I would recommend both reading the books and watching the show. They are very different, but again, like you have like all the main girls are kind of, you know, the same characters as you go, but then like their story changes a little bit as it's, you know, portrayed in there. But like that was fine. Like I was okay with it. Like I was okay having, because it's almost kind of like how you have like a comic book where they're like, you have Captain America and he does something the way in the book, but then another comic book which is also Captain America but maybe a different universe, just kind of strays off, like has a different timeline. You know, it's kind of like the same thing. Like, you know, you have your idea of how it needs to be in the book, but then in the TV series, it's the same characters, but it kind of goes off at his own little tangent and his own little timeline. And I'm okay with that because like you're still getting the characters, and it's almost like you're getting a new adventure with those characters.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Like I just, you know, you just kind of have to keep them separate in your mind, but still enjoy. I mean, if you can, if you like the movie or TV show or whatever it's being, you know, made into, you know, you can still enjoy it. So, and another author I just thought of, P.L. Travers for Mary Poppins. Yep. She did not want that to be made into a movie.
She was very much adamant.
Very adamant that she did not. Like Walt, sounds like he wined and dined her and very much wanted that to be made into a movie. And could you imagine like the Disney franchise if that had never been made into a movie? Mm-hmm. Like that would just I don't know. Like I just can't see
how do you like? It's so like weird to think of like what would Disney be without Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke being in Mary Poppins, and Mary Poppins never being a thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's just so... Like, I can't like, that changes so much. That changes everything. Because what Mary Poppins did for the Walt Disney Company and how that grew, you know, even more popularity, and how much that movie did for the company, like, without that there, like, that's so hard to imagine. But then, like, P.L. Travers was very much like, I don't want this happening. I don't want you ruining my character. But in the end, like, you know, she realized, like, Walt wasn't ruining the character.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just a different tangent timeline that Walt was taking. But, like, the heart of that character. And that's where all these adaptations where it's kind of like, as long as the heart of the character is still there, and, like, I can still... Like, when I'm reading the Captain Marvel books, and I'm watching Captain Marvel in the movie, as long as those feel like the same characters, I don't really care if the story around them changes, because the characters themselves are still staying the same.
Yeah, for sure.
Still skinny.
Yes. Yes, Tadai.
So, to finish up, are there, I guess, in general, when you're picking out a new book, or you're picking out... you know, something to watch. Is there anything that really, like, catches your eye, or, like, really, like, intrigues you to make you want to watch that movie or read that book? Is there something that, you know, just how do you intake what you want to, like, read next? Like, what sparks your interest?
Like something new, or something that, like, I've already... Maybe
something new. Or both. We'll leave you up to both.
I think when I'm rewatching something, I think it's the characters that I'm drawn to, for the most part. I mean, yeah, like, I think, like, you fall in love with them, and, like, the first one that comes to mind is Miss Marvel. Like, she was the first comic book that I read, really, and that was thanks to you, because you said it was really good and I would enjoy it, and you were right.
It's a really good book.
Yeah, and just seeing her character in her show, and I don't know, like, I think you just can't help but fall in love with her, like, and I don't know, and I can relate to her, even though she looks nothing like me. She has a family, like, nothing like mine, but I feel like you can relate to her, like. So I think it's just these characters that you kind of fall in love with, and then you want to see where their story goes. So But I think it's kind of the opposite when I'm looking for something new. Like, I want to know what the story is. Like, what can I expect to happen? Like, does this sound okay? Because you really don't know anything about the characters, really, like, if you're finding something that's brand new.
So do you think, like, especially when it comes to, like, a book, do you think, like reading the back cover is sufficient enough? Or do you feel like you need to, like, read a little bit more, like, something online, like what people think? Or is it something, do you, like, read, like, the first chapter and do you know? Or
usually it's like, it's reading, like, the synopsis on the back cover, if it's going to be something that I, do I think I'm going to like it? And, usually I can tell by, like, after, like, the first chapter or two, like, if I'm, like, really hooked and want to keep reading, then it's a good book. But if by, like, the second or third chapter, like, I'm still, like, kind of struggling to get into it, then I'm just, like, it's maybe not for me. But there are some books, like, where it doesn't really start picking up until you're, like, 100 pages in. And, because, like, there's just so much story to be told that you need to get all of that information before you can start to appreciate, like, or really get into, like, what's coming next. So, yeah, I don't know. So I tend to kind of gravitate more towards, like, the same genre of books, but I feel like I kind of need to, like, open my horizons or whatever it is. Like, I feel like I need to get into, like, more stuff, and I really would like to get into reading more books or graphic novels. Like, I think I would really enjoy reading Paper Girls. I might try out Saga. I know you say it's weird, but I kind of want to know, like, what the hype is about.
It's so weird because, like, with Saga, like, it's something that I would highly recommend people watch or reading, but then I'm just like, I don't want people to think that I'm weird because of what I'm recommending them, because it is so weird. Like, basically it's two, like, civilizations or two, like, different type of people that are fighting in this war that's just they're fighting just because it's fighting. Like, at this point, like, there's no, like, real need to keep this war going, but they're like, well, we stop this and then, these people are going to be mad, so we need to keep this war on to appease other people. But then it kind of starts off almost like Romeo and Juliet, where it's like two of these people from, like, different planets kind of fall in love with each other and have a baby. And then the whole story is basically that baby's story. It's told from the baby's perspective years off in the future when they're grown up. Like, that's, like, there's kind of, like, the narrator above it all, but then you see the whole entire story. But, like, it's at times it's very raunchy. Like, you see, like, people having sex, or then it's times where it gets really disgusting, where, like, you see, like, really horrific gory instances, or it's time where it's very cringy, where you see like sex slave trade going on. So, like, there's so much different aspects to it, and it's not just one specific genre. It is science fiction. It's wartime type of stories. It's at times passion. At times it's horror. Yeah. It's so just.
It sounds very diverse.
It's so diverse. Yeah. There's no one, like, way to characterize it, and, like, the characters, like, obviously, like, Marco and Elena kind of look like human characters, but Marco has horns. But then, like, you get into characters that are like Goose, where he's like a little seal, or, like, you have like people that look like cats or walruses, or, like, these giant ogres, and like, it's all over the place, and it is so weird. But, like, I have never been more attached to a story, and, like, I remember after reading, and it just came up in my stories on Facebook the other day, where I finished reading issue 50, where it was like 49 or 50. It was right before they took their break. Mm-hmm. And, like, I just remember, like, I was so sad. Like, I was so heartbroken by this story.
Was it like Infinity War sad?
Yes. It was when you see all the characters being snapped away, like, that's how sad it was.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my god, like, I can't imagine, like, what's gonna happen here. And then they went on, like, a 2+ year hiatus. Yep. So, like, imagine like you watching Infinity War and having to wait that year to watch
double it.
Yeah. It isn't something like, and you know, like a fan that's getting into it right now, like they can read that so they can just go from that issue to the next issue where they kind of pick up the rest of the story, and like you don't have to like sit with that pit in your feeling for so long.
That reminds me, like when Sarah and Matthew were watching Infinity War, and I'm pretty sure Matthew was like, from the fan club podcast.
Yeah.
And Matthew was kind of joking. I think he's like, well, maybe we should make you wait a year before going into the next one.
Like, and
that's just with any like franchise coming in. Like, you don't have to wait any amount of time in between whatever.
Yeah. Well, and like I remember, like, I think we mentioned it on the show before, but like when we were in the first time we watched Infinity War in the theaters, like I was so like. I literally felt like someone like literally like ripped my gut out. Like I was a wreck. Like I remember like being, because we had like the nice comfy seats in the theater, and I just remember being in like a fetal position watching the credits, and I'm just like, what the hell just happened? I
could not talk to him for like at least 5 minutes.
No, like almost the entire credit scene. Like I was silent. I was beyond emotions. Like I was just so like and it was one of those things, like, I know Thanos was going to snap them. Like, I know that was going to happen. Spoiler alert, Thanos is going to snap them. But it's just, like, I couldn't, like, I didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't want it to happen. And I didn't know, like, how the Russo brothers came in and, like, just made that happen was just, like, oh my God. Like, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt so sad. I was heartbroken. Like, I didn't want to talk to anybody, and then I went and watched it 3 days later, and I'm just like, oh my God. Or like when Spider-Man's like, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. I'm like, no, I can't take this anymore. So it's kind of like stuff like that where I'm just kind of like, when I was reading Saga, and I'm just kind of like, that's kind of how I felt. Like, I felt like that gut punch where I'm just kind of like, this is so sad. Like, how can I, like... And granted, I had to wait, but like at that point, like I wasn't like so far behind, but it was still like, if you had to wait that full like 2+ year hiatus for the story to continue, I'm just kind of like,
yeah. Okay, so I have a question for you, just to try to, I guess, try to wrap things up. So I know like the title of this, does reading the book, novel, comic book, whatever, make you a better fan? And you know that I don't read the comic books. Like, so I don't really have, like, do you think I am less of a fan of the MCU for not reading? Like, do you think my opinions of these characters and movies are valid? Like, do you think I...
Yeah, I do. And I think I could push it the other, kind of turn it the other way. Like, I have not finished and do not currently have any plans to read the entire series of Harry Potter books. Does that make me less of a fan because I am purposely not... I don't have any intention on reading the books, but I still do enjoy the movies when we watch them with you.
Yeah, no, I don't think it does. I remember hearing, I don't know if it was a quote or just something that I read. You don't have to be like 100% knowledgeable on something that you're a fan of. Like, if you love something, if you love the characters and you love them, like, it doesn't really matter like how much, like, if you haven't read all the books or if you haven't seen all the movies, like, it doesn't matter. If you love them, you love them. And I think your opinion is just as valid as anyone else's. Which is something that I've learned more like doing this podcast, because there are so many like other podcasts that we follow that are MCU based that they do read the comics for, and
this is by no means like bad mouthing them at all.
Oh,
like, they're
no,
awesome podcasts. We definitely recommend checking them out.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But they definitely have a different perspective, or they feel or look at that a different way than we do You know, especially when it comes like to Marvel, because like as much as like I do love Marvel and like reading the books,
Yeah.
like one, it's been a minute since I've actually sat down and read some of these stories, and you know, a lot of my experience like learning about these new characters comes from the movies, not from the books.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially like with Ant-Man and Kang, like my experience right now is just what we saw in the movie, as opposed to like I think I have one series over there in my comic book area that has Kang in it, and I don't have a whole lot of like exposure or background to him. So I'm like, the movies are, and I think that's I think they're serving its purpose for, you know, fans like us that maybe don't have that like in-depth like college level, you know, background, you know, studies of these characters, because like they're bringing us into these character stories, and then if we like them, we can then, you know, reference the source material.
Right.
So like the Guardians, like you didn't know anything about the Guardians, you thought it was like just a weird stupid premise, and then Guardians turns out to be like one of your favorite franchises and properties in the MCU, and you love these characters. Well, then that opens it up to like, oh, well, I can experience more of these characters if I wanted to, because there's the books here. Or I could just ask Tai Tai, and he can tell me more about these characters.
Yeah, I think that really makes it fun for both of us, because obviously, like, you definitely read more comic books, I read more just regular books, and again, it's just one of those things that we just mash really well together. But I don't, like, dismiss or diminish like your opinions on things just because like you haven't read the books. Like right. I don't like, I think that's like very like belittling, and not like, it's just not being a good person. Like if you like, well, you didn't read this, so like your opinion doesn't matter as much, or you don't hold it as high. Like I think sometimes like if you're just so wrapped up in like just the book material, and you can't really like open yourself up to like really enjoy other adaptations of it, I don't know, like I don't think that's really good to do either. I mean, sure, you can be critical of it, and if you don't really like it, then that's fine, but like I don't think that's like, I don't think you can really, you're not gaining more than what you think that you're not gaining what you're thinking you're gaining by doing that.
Yeah, you're not like, you're kind of like, you're forcing yourself into a corner by only expecting to see what was written on a page or what was drawn in a panel, as opposed to like, you can take these characters and you can explore the world that they live in, and you can enjoy that instead of being so critical to be like, oh, this character wasn't a girl, or this character wasn't black, or this or that, or like, you know, I didn't like the way that they portrayed this death, or I don't like the changes that they made to this character. Cap isn't a Nazi, and I'm like, well, in this series he is, so you're gonna have to just not read it, or like be intrigued and figure out why Captain America's a Nazi now. So like it just kind of depends on your willingness to be open to expanding your, I guess, your preconceived notions about what happens with these characters, what happens in this world.
Well, and I guess on the other hand too, like, I mean, when you're going into like these movies and like shows and stuff, and people are maybe upset with what happens, like, I mean, I guess you don't want to like not validate those feelings either, because I mean, you do have to realize like the source material that it comes from. But I don't know, like I just don't want it to be like, I guess I don't like it when people say like, well, the comic book is like the sole like source and you have to follow that to a T kind of thing.
And especially when and we're not really DC fans, so like it's not something that like I can really like say much on, but like from what I can tell, like DC doesn't really stick to the books. Neither does Marvel. The MCU and what they've done in the MCU, they take key points from these storylines, like from the Civil War storyline, or from like the Infinity Saga, storylines, but like a lot of it is different. A lot of it changes. A lot of it is not even remotely close to what you're seeing in these stories. One, it's probably just because like of how limited they are with what actors they have, or you know, at the time in the MCU, like what do we have access to for what characters. To, like, a lot of times when you're watching, especially with, like, Civil War, which comes to mind a lot in this episode, like, there was a lot of characters. Like, everybody in the MCU had to essentially pick a side. Are you registering or are you not registering? Or even with, like, Civil War 2 between Captain Marvel and Iron Man, like, do you want to use this character's ability to, you know, prosecute people before they even did a crime or not? Like, everyone had to make a decision on that.
Yeah.
But in, like, these movies, like, the scope doesn't seem as big because you can't have a room filled with all the X-Men, all the Fantastic Four, you know, the Defenders, like Luke Cage and Jessica Jones and Daredevil. You can't have them all intermingling with all the Avengers, like, in that scene where, like, their General Ross is kind of saying, like, this is all the stuff the Avengers have did.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have literally every single Marvel character in that room discussing it, because, like, that's just, that you can't, like, that's not going to work. So, like, you temper your expectations because some of these limitations have to be put in place because it wouldn't look good if it was done that way.
Yeah. Well, and that's, like, another thing, like, I feel like that gets brought up is, like, well, where was this character when Thanos was around? Like, you can't...
Or where was Thor? What was Thor doing during Civil War?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter because they are off serving their own purpose, which you will eventually see. You just got to be like, put your patient pants on and
put your patient pants on,
and it'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it doesn't matter if you are a fan of the movies and then read the books, or if you're a fan of the books and then read the movies. It doesn't make you a better fan either way. As long as you are enjoying whatever material you're consuming, whether it be, you know, pages that are written in a book, or panels written or drawn out in a comic, or just only watching the movies. Like, as long as you are enjoying that and you can find common bonds with people who are also enjoying that, I don't think it matters. It doesn't make you a better fan, but it doesn't make you a worse fan. Right.
Yeah. And I think no matter what, I think, you know, your opinions are valid, and I don't know, and I think that's one of the reasons we started this podcast. Like, we have lots of opinions on these things, and, you know, we obviously have different reading styles and, like, what we like to read, but we all enjoy the MCU movies, and you know, that's just kind of what brings us together, and we fall in love with these characters, whether it is from the books or from the movies. Like, you know, and it makes for really good discussion. So
yeah. Speaking of really good discussion, I think we had a pretty good discussion today about all this.
Yeah.
I was so excited for this episode coming in. Like, I knew kind of brainstorming ideas for season 2, and this was, I think, something that I kind of had on the back burner from, like, season 1.
Yeah, I think this was an idea that we had kind of early on when we started. And I think more like for me, because I'm like, I don't read the comic books, so I'm like, am I not as good of a fan because I don't read the comic books? But I thoroughly enjoy, like, the MCU and the Marvel movies and these characters, and that is not something, like, growing up that I thought I would ever say, but I do, and I just connect to some more than others, and, you know, and there's just some that I have probably some not very popular opinions on. But I don't know, but that just makes it fun to hear, like, what other people have to say about it. So
yeah, and it's something like we know what each other's, like, thoughts are, but, like, getting to sit down, like, every week and, like, just talk about it in depth and just like stay on one topic, as much as we like to try to stay on one topic on these episodes. But it's just nice to sit down and, like, finally, like, get to, like, kind of blow some steam off and, you know, really really understand kind of, like, where we stand on all these things, because, like, you know, that's, like you said, it's what this episode was for, and like, I feel like a lot of people probably have similar opinions as us, but you know, it's nice to see that, you know, maybe we have not a bad opinion, but, like, an unpopular opinion, but, like, other people have that too.
Yeah, so we all have our unpopular opinions, and that's what makes us unique.
But thank you for listening to today's episode.
Yeah, if you made it to the end, I know this is, I'm not sure exactly what the runtime is, but it's going to be on the longer side.
It's going to be on the longer side. I know that one for sure. So definitely appreciate everyone sticking around for this one. I'm so happy with the way this turned out. I already know going into editing this is going to be a really fun episode, a really great episode. Again, it's one that I've been wanting to do for a while now. I'm glad we finally got to do it. And if no one likes this or no one listens to it, at least I got to sit down and talk, movies and comics and Marvel with you for like an hour and a half. So that's a win in my book.
Yeah, for sure.
But make sure to follow us along on Instagram and on YouTube. Thank you for watching on YouTube if you are. I'm really happy with the engagement that we have on YouTube. Our videos are getting more like watches than I thought we were going to.
Yeah, and I think so that's really cool.
That's really awesome, and so I appreciate everyone for sticking around and all that. You can always find all of our updates on Instagram at Team Unicorn Podcast. This is also obviously an audio podcast, so we're on all the audio places as well. So
yeah, and make sure to leave all your spicy opinions down in the comments because as always, I love to hear what people have to say and, just let us know, are you...
Hi, Lace.
Hi, Lace.
Someone decided to join us right at the end of today's episode.
Yeah. Say
hi
to the people, Lace.
Yeah, say hi, Lace. But we'd appreciate if you want to follow along, subscribe, thumb up the video if you're watching on YouTube, or give us some 5-star reviews on the audio podcast sites. We really appreciate all that, and it just helps feel us like we're validating ourselves that this is good and we want to keep going and keep doing it. But as long as we have awesome conversation topics like this, we'll definitely love to keep doing this.
Yeah, for sure.
But for today's episode of the Team Unicorn Podcast, I'm Tyler.
And I'm Sammy.
And it's been magical.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Team Unicorn Podcast. You can find us on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, like, and review wherever you are listening, and follow us on Instagram to keep up with all things Team Unicorn. And remember, stay magical.
Lacey, we did it!